Hi everyone, my name is Sahil Chawla. I'm an MCAT tutor here at Shemmassian Academic Consulting, and today I'm going to go over a sociology passage and I'll discuss some of the strategies I like to use when encountering questions like these on the MCAT. Alright, so I've got the passage pulled up here in front of me, and I'll basically read it out loud and think out loud, and I'll discuss highlighting and outlining as two strategies you can use when approaching these types of passages. Also, as a heads up, I'll be going at a pace that's slower than what you normally should be going at, just because I'll be discussing the passages and the questions as I go through them. But for test day and during your independent practice, you should be aiming for about 8 minutes per passage for the Psych-Soc section. So with that all out of the way, let's get to it. Traditionally, individuals with middle to high socioeconomic status, SES, have lived in suburban areas which tend to have well-funded schooling systems and reduced crime. In recent years, however, major urban areas have seen an increase in the movement of individuals with middle to high SES move back to newly renovated city center neighborhoods. As a result, individuals with low SES who previously lived in those neighborhoods have been displaced. All right, so if I was going the outlining route, I'd probably summarize this first paragraph as high SES displacing low SES. And if I was going the highlighting route, I think what I would probably highlight here would be this last sentence, is individuals with low SES are being displaced. That to me is kind of the big point here, is this displacement of individuals of lower socioeconomic status. So moving on to the next paragraph. In a new study, researchers aim to track house prices in a city center area of Houston, Texas over a period of 20 years. The results from the study are shown in figure 1. All right, so one thing I've noticed is in a lot of passages when an experiment is introduced, they usually have this really nice, concise sentence to give you a broad overview of what the whole point of the experiment is. And it'll be something kind of like, in order to investigate the effects of X on Y, researchers did Z. Something I just noticed in the biology section, the chemistry, physics, and even the psych-soc section. I really like looking for this sentence and always highlighting it, just so that if I ever get lost in the details, I can use that sentence as kind of a anchor to know what is the big picture here. So I would highlight that sentence. Here it's this right here. The researchers aim to track house prices over a period of 20 years. And if I was outlining, honestly, I probably would switch here to just highlighting and just highlight that sentence. But I guess a way to outline this could be, say, house prices over 20 years. And just notice I use some shorthand. I'm not using really complete sentences, just because time is of the essence on the MCAT. So as long as you can read your outline, that's kind of really what matters. So here I try to keep it simple. House prices over 20 years, and they have a little graph for us to refer to. So let's just take a quick look at that and see if we can just identify maybe a pattern real quick. So we have our x-axis, which is in years, and then we have our price per square foot, so like the house prices essentially. And looking at it, I see a general trend that basically house prices started kind of going up, right? So I don't want to look too deep into this because I don't really have a question here. I'm not at the questions yet, so I'm not sure how deep I need to look into it. But taking a quick glance at it and seeing if you can identify some sort of general trend is not a bad idea. So after doing that, let's move on to paragraph 3. The increase in housing costs has forced low SES individuals to seek housing in more industrial areas of town. As a result, these individuals face increased exposure to polluted air and water, thereby increasing the incidence and prevalence of certain health conditions such as asthma or cancer. In addition, many of these low SES individuals experience an exacerbation of their environment-related health conditions due to a lack of healthcare access. Okay, that was kind of a lot, but let's try to just keep it concise and see what we think is the big picture here. Two things that I might, probably the first thing I might like to highlight would be this increasing incidence and prevalence of certain health conditions. That seems important. And maybe another one would be experience an exacerbation of their environment-related health conditions. One or the other seems fine. I think I would go with the first one just because it's a little bit broader. At least gives me a bigger picture that there's a increase in the health conditions this community or lower socioeconomic status individuals are facing after they're being displaced. But that second sentence is kind of important too, that there's this exacerbation also because of this lack of healthcare access. If I was outlining, I think what I would put here would just be, let's see, I think the big picture here is that displacement is basically leading to a decrease in health. Pardon my handwriting, but like I said, for the MCAT, if I can read it, that's kind of what matters. If you have spelling mistakes or anything like that, don't try to take the time to correct it, So now that I've got a good big picture idea of what's kind of going on here, let's go ahead and dive into the questions. So, all right, question 1. Actually, really quick, just looking at these questions, one thing I noticed is that it seems like it's a lot of terms and definitions. So this is a really term-heavy question set, and that's something you're very likely to run into on this section for the MCAT. There's a lot of terms you need to know for psych and soc, so be prepared and have those concepts and terms really well understood. 2 key ideas I would like to point out before I dive into this is for these term-heavy question sets, process of elimination is probably the best strategy to have ready to go for when you're not really sure which one's the correct answer, but you can start eliminating options here and there. And it's just pretty basic, but just something to keep in mind. Process of elimination is probably going to be your best friend for these questions. Also, second is be careful of trap answers. MCAT likes to throw some terms at you that might sound like they're correct, but they're not even like concepts in sociology, for example. So process of elimination and trap answers, those are just 2 things I'd like to point out. The process of elimination is going to be a great strategy for really narrowing down options and increasing your chances of getting a question right if you're unsure of the concept it's testing you on. And being mindful of trap answers will allow you to be on the lookout for kind of the bait that the MCAT likes to throw at you and hope you take a bite of. So let's dive into the first question and see what we have here. Question 1, the process described in paragraph 1 is best known as A, renovation, B, gentrification, C, rejuvenation, D, intergenerational mobility. All right, so paragraph 1 was this whole thing, and you can see in my outline here, paragraph 1 was all about this high socioeconomic status and middle socioeconomic status individuals moving into these urban areas where lower socioeconomic status individuals are living. But then this renovation occurs and lower socioeconomic status individuals are being pushed out. So which concept sounds like that's it? So looking at them, renovation and rejuvenation, yeah, those are words that I am familiar with, but I don't really recall any of those being terms or concepts in psychology or sociology, at least during my content review phase. So those kind of seem like the trap answers that I mentioned a little bit earlier. That rejuvenation, for example, kind of does sound like it could be correct because you have these city centers being renovated, and also renovation sounds like it could be correct too, right? But they're not really the concepts that really encompass the whole idea of what's going on in that paragraph. So I don't think it's renovation or rejuvenation. Gentrification sounds really good to me because gentrification is basically when you have a area, like a lower income area usually in an urban environment, and it's renovated and money is invested into it, but this jacks up prices. And so the lower socioeconomic status individuals who are living in that area end up having to move out, and they get displaced, and people from higher socioeconomic status are able to come in and live there instead. So that sounds like exactly what's going on in paragraph 1. So I really like B, but let's go ahead and look at D as well. Intragenerational mobility. Intergenerational mobility really refers to just someone experiencing a change in like their socioeconomic status within their own lifetime. So if someone is in their 20s and they're really low socioeconomic status, but then when they're in their 40s, they're a very high socioeconomic status, they've experienced intragenerational mobility because that's happening within a generation. So don't think it's D. Also not A or C like we discussed, so B seems to be the best answer. All right, 2, the exacerbation of health conditions due to lack of access to healthcare is known as. All right, again, really term heavy. Let's go through these. Absolute poverty, that doesn't seem like the right answer to me. That has more to do with not being able to get your basic needs met in life. Contrast that with relative poverty, which is more so about in relation to others in your community. You're not receiving like a fair amount of resources or access to resources. So that has absolute poverty has more to do with that you're just not even getting any of your basic needs met. So that doesn't seem like that's the correct answer. B, second sickness. This sounds really like a good option for me just because I know the way I define second sickness is your health conditions getting worse or a worsening of health conditions due to a social injustice, and accessibility of healthcare is definitely a social justice topic. So I really like B. However, let's go look at C and D as well. Environmental justice. This actually sounds really familiar with what they're talking about in paragraph 3, where these individuals are moving to more industrial areas and now they're exposed to like polluted air and water. That would be environmental injustice that's occurring for them because they are experiencing a higher level of environmental hazards than other individuals are. So this isn't really related to a lack of access to healthcare in particular, and also I don't really see anything related to justice or anything about this being just that's happening to them. So I would eliminate C. D, medical mistrust. This has more so to do with individuals not trusting medical providers and not really a lack of access to healthcare. Second sickness to me really does still seem like it's going to be the best option. So go with B. All right, 3, researchers conduct a new study within a U.S. city and find that it is more difficult to find healthy and affordable food options in low SES neighborhoods versus high SES neighborhoods. Which of the following terms best characterizes this observation? All right, A, food desert, B, global inequalities, C, intersectionality, and D, urban decay. So again, really term heavy here. When I look at A, food desert, this to me does seem like the best answer because a food desert is basically an area where there is a lack of affordable, healthy food options, and that's pretty much exactly what the question stem is asking for. So I would just go with that answer. But let's look at the other 3 options as well. We have global inequalities. One way to really just eliminate this right off the bat is, even if you're not sure what global inequalities like technically are, what the term really means, you can see that it says global, whereas in the question stem we're talking about within a U.S. city, so that's not really global at all. So I can immediately rule that one out. C, intersectionality. Intersectionality has more so to do with the idea that to really understand the perspective and experience of someone, you need to recognize they are multiple different groups or multiple different statuses that they have within society. That someone is not just a woman, they might be a woman and an ethnic minority. And so being an ethnic minority has its unique set of circumstances and barriers that come with it, as well as with being a woman has its unique set of circumstances and barriers that come with it. So if someone is both an ethnic minority and a woman, you can't just look at one or the other. You have to see both of them to get a better idea of the challenges and experiences they have in society. Not really what's going on here because we're talking about healthy, affordable food options not being available in a certain area. So again, eliminate that. Urban decay is more so about areas in an urban environment naturally deteriorating or just deteriorating over time. Again, this is not really the best option here, so I'd go with A, food desert. All right, let's look at this last question here. Which of the following is least likely to contribute to social reproduction? A, cultural capital. B, social capital. C, prestige. D, immigration. All right, social reproduction is basically saying it's the concept or the idea is that social class or your socioeconomic status tends to be passed down. So people who are born to parents of higher socioeconomic status are way more likely to end up being in a higher socioeconomic or have a higher socioeconomic status when they're adults. Whereas someone who's born to a very low socioeconomic status family, when they're an adult, they're more likely to end up still being of low socioeconomic status compared to someone, who's of higher socioeconomic status. So think of it in terms of kind of like an inheritance of class, right? So which one of these is going to be least likely to contribute to that? When we look at cultural capital, and we're also given social capital, capital is basically anything that gives you an advantage in society. Cultural capital specifically is going to be capital that is not social or financial, but more so just something that we as a society value. So let's say someone has a degree from Harvard. Now, a degree definitely has value, but the Harvard part is where it's cultural, because as a society, we really do value Harvard and see it as a very reputable institution. So there is just a bit of cultural connotation or cultural advantage they're gaining there by having a degree that's specifically from Harvard. Social capital, so to connect that to the question stem first, that would very likely contribute to social reproduction. Again, this is all about giving you an advantage that you can kind of then pass on to the next generation or to your children and so on. So I would go ahead and eliminate A. Social capital, again, it's going to give you an advantage, and social specifically is related to who you know, such as your family, your peers, friends, and coworkers, colleagues. So definitely going to make it easier to pass on like a higher socioeconomic status, so that, for example, if my father is of high socioeconomic status, then he is someone that can really connect me to many opportunities that someone who doesn't have know someone like my father that they wouldn't have. So it makes it easier for me to end up being in a higher socioeconomic status because of this social capital I have, which is my family, right? So I would go ahead and eliminate B. C, prestige. Prestige is kind of a it's basically, prestige has more so to do with, students often conflate it with class, so this is why I want to be specific here. Prestige has more so to do with like the social popularity someone might have in society, and this can be independent of financial resources. So someone might be a writer and they may not be as wealthy as a a venture capitalist or a mega tech billionaire, right? But their writings might have an influence and they might be very popular, and that in a way allows them to get some political power. This kind of goes back to what Max Weber was talking about in his 3 components of social stratification theory. If you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, definitely read up on his theory, because it is a topic that can be tested on the MCAT, and here you do have to know one of these components, which he talks about is prestige. So prestige is definitely going to allow someone to be able to continue pass on their status in society. So I would go ahead and eliminate C. And if I didn't know what emigration meant, here my process of elimination could allow me to just go ahead and pick D as the most likely to be correct answer here. However, I do know what it means, and emigration is leaving a certain area, whereas immigration is coming into an area. So if someone was emigrating out of the United States, that's how you would refer to it, as coming out of the United States, whereas immigrating would be into the United States. Emigration is going to be probably least likely to contribute to social reproduction, because people that are emigrating tend to be leaving an area where they are have limited opportunities and going to an area where they're having more likely to have more opportunities. And you have the classic example with immigrant families who come to more developed nations just because they want to have a better future, not for themselves necessarily, but more so for their children. And that's going to allow them to have children who are able to achieve a higher status in society. So this would end up not contributing to social reproduction. And hence, I believe D here would be the best answer. All right, so that concludes our sociology passage walkthrough. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content on tackling the MCAT. Also, check out the link in the description below where you can sign up for our free MCAT question of the day emails. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.